This is easily one of the most beautiful planes ever built. Not the most deadly, not the most strategically significant. Beautiful. That's the word people reach for when they encounter the Horten Ho-229 for the first time. A jet-powered flying wing built from birch plywood in the final months of World War II. An aircraft that looks like it was designed in 2040 and somehow crash-landed in 1945. You've heard the stealth story. Northrop Grumman built a full-scale replica in 2008 and 2009, tested its radar cross-section for a National Geographic documentary. Results suggested a modestly reduced radar signature, possibly aided by charcoal-laden wood glue in the aircraft's construction. Reimar Horten claimed decades after the war he'd considered radar absorption in his material choices. Historians are split. It's interesting, it's unresolved, and it is not why we're here. We're here because of the shape. The pure flying wing, no fuselage, no tail, nothing but wing from tip to tip. And the question of why it took the rest of the world 50 years to accept what a handful of obsessives already knew, that this was the most beautiful and most efficient form of flight ever conceived. The Horten brothers, Walter and Reimar, are part of that story, an essential part. But the man who chased this shape the longest, who paid the highest price for it, who was ultimately proven right in the most devastating way imaginable, wasn't German. He was a self-taught engineer from California named Jack Northrop, and the flying wing consumed his entire life. Jack Northrop was born in 1895 in Newark, New Jersey. His family moved to California when he was a boy, and he grew up in a state where the aircraft industry was about to be invented from nothing. He didn't go to college, couldn't afford it. What he did instead was teach himself mechanical drawing, structural engineering, aerodynamics, with the methodical intensity of someone who knew exactly what he wanted to do, even if he didn't yet know what shape it would take. His first aviation job came around 1916, working as a draftsman at the Lockheed Aircraft Manufacturing Company, later renamed Lockheed, alongside Alan Lockheed himself. Technical labor, blueprints, stress calculations. The invisible work that translates a designer's sketch into something that won't come apart at altitude. But Northrop absorbed everything. He was a sponge with ambitions. By the late 1920s, he designed the Lockheed Vega, a sleek, streamlined monoplane with a plywood monocoque fuselage that Amelia Earhart would fly across the Atlantic and Wiley Post would fly around the world. It was a beautiful airplane by any standard of the era, fast, clean, modern. But it had a fuselage, it had a tail, and somewhere during those years, nobody can pin down exactly when, a conviction took root in Jack Northrop's mind that would refuse to let go for 6 decades. The fuselage was dead weight. The tail was a compromise. The only part of an aeroplane that actually generates lift is the wing. Every pound of fuselage structure, every square foot of tail surface, every rivet connecting components that exist solely to support other components, all of it was parasitic drag, an engineering crutch, a concession to the limitations of conventional thinking. Eliminate it. All of it. What remains is the purest, most efficient, most elegant form of flight possible. A wing. Nothing else. This wasn't casual theorizing for Jack Northrop. It was closer to religious conviction. Absolute, unshakable, requiring not argument but proof. And unlike most believers, he had the skills to build his own cathedral. By the late 1930s, working through his newly founded Northrop Corporation, he designed a small experimental aircraft to demonstrate the concept could actually work. He designated it the N1M, A small flying wing with a boomerang-shaped planform that looked like nothing else at any airfield in America. They hauled it out to the dry lake beds near Newark in the Mojave Desert, where cracked earth stretched flat to the horizon and nobody asked uncomfortable questions. The N-1M lifted off. It didn't fly well. Underpowered, twitchy, prone to yaw excursions that would have sent any reasonable person back to conventional designs. Didn't matter. It flew. A pure flying wing, tailless, fuselageless, moving through the air under its own power over the California desert. Jack Northrop stood on a dry lake, watching his conviction take flight. He'd spend the rest of his life paying for what he saw that day. From that stubby proof of concept, Northrop scaled up, with the patience of a man who knew the answer and just needed the world to see it. The N-9M followed, a 1/3 scale testbed for the bomber he actually intended to build, with a 60-foot wingspan and enough volume to evaluate handling at real speeds. The first N-9M flew on December 27, 1942. 3 more were built. 1 crashed during testing, killing its pilot. First blood spilled in pursuit of Northrop's vision. Not the last. The surviving N-9Ms logged thousands of hours of flight data, validating the flying wing at a scale that mattered to generals. And from that data, Jack Northrop went all in. The YB-35, a full-scale strategic bomber with a 172-foot wingspan, 172 feet of continuous, unbroken wing, broader than a B-29 superfortress, designed to cross oceans and return without refueling. 4 Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp major engines, the most powerful piston engines America could manufacture, buried entirely within the wing and driving contra-rotating propellers through long, complicated gearbox shafts extending to the trailing edge. Crew of up to 15 men housed inside the wing itself. No fuselage, no tail. From directly above, the YB-35 was a vast, smooth, swept boomerang of aluminum, the shape Jack Northrop had carried in his mind for 2 decades. Finally built at a scale that could reshape strategic warfare. But here's the thing about flying wings that people who've never designed one can't quite grasp. The very quality that makes the form so beautiful makes it treacherous to fly. A conventional airplane achieves stability through its tail surfaces, horizontal for pitch, vertical fin for yaw. The same way an arrow flies straight because of its fletching. Remove the tail, and you're flying an object that wants to tumble end over end. Every instability the tail would have corrected must be solved by the wing itself, through subtle control surfaces and precise weight distribution and aerodynamic trickery that pushed 1940s engineering right to its breaking point. The YB-35 was plagued with problems, most centered on those long propeller drive shafts and their gearboxes. Vibration, overheating, mechanical failures that had nothing to do with the flying wing concept and everything to do with the brute mechanics of transmitting thousands of horsepower through the internal structure of a wing. Still, on June 25, 1946, the YB-35 lifted off from Northrop Field in Hawthorne, California, and headed for Newark Army Airfield. It was enormous. It was strange. It was magnificent, and it was, by any honest measure, ahead of its time. Now, while Northrop refined his vision across years of desert testing in California, something extraordinary had already happened 6,000 miles away. Because 2 brothers in Germany had independently arrived at the exact same truth, and they'd acted on it even earlier. Walter Horten, born November 13, 1913 in Bonn. His younger brother Reimar, born March 12, 1915. As teenagers, they'd encountered the tailless aircraft concepts of Alexander Lippisch and the all-wing designs of Hugo Junkers, and the same conviction that seized Jack Northrop seized them. The wing was all you needed. Everything else was drag. In 1931, when Walter was 18 and Reimar just 16, they began designing their first flying wing glider, the Horten one. By 1933, they had built it and flown it. Crude, unstable, barely controllable. It flew. That was enough. The Horten Ho followed in 1934, sleeker, the pilot lying prone to cut frontal area. The Horten III around 1938, with markedly improved handling. Then the Horten IV, a high-performance sailplane with a 20-meter wingspan and long, gracefully tapered wings that gave it the silhouette of an albatross frozen in mid-glide. The Ho 4 was exquisite by any measure, competitive with the best conventional sailplanes of the era, and proof that the brothers had been building things of startling beauty for a full decade before anyone handed them a jet engine. Reimar did the designing, quiet, introspective, consumed by the purity of the form. Walter flew the prototypes and battled the Luftwaffe bureaucracy that tolerated them but never truly believed. Two self-taught designers working with hand tools and wood glue, while Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf commanded industrial empires. By 1944, their obsession had produced something that would have stopped Jack Northrop dead if he'd ever seen it. The Horten Ho 229, a jet-powered flying wing with a wingspan of 16.76 meters and a length of just 7.47 meters, far wider than long, with a height of barely 2.81 meters. Two turbojets buried completely inside the wing. No fuselage, no tail, no vertical surfaces of any kind. From above, a broad, swept boomerang. From the side, a knife edge tapering to nothing. Head on, a dark sliver with two circular intakes flanking the cockpit like the eyes of something that hunts at night. In its standard late-war Luftwaffe camouflage, dark brownish-violet and green over pale blue-grey undersurfaces, it stopped looking like an airplane altogether. The silhouette flattened, the details vanished. What remained was something more elemental, a shadow given form. And this shape, this thing that looks engineered in 2040, was built from birch plywood, skinned over wooden ribs, mounted on a welded tubular steel skeleton. Test pilot Lieutenant Erwin Ziller reportedly pushed it to approximately 494 miles per hour, with projections suggesting a refined production version could approach or exceed 600. Plywood, the material of bookshelves and garden sheds, at nearly 500 miles per hour, with 600 on the horizon. Picture what airplanes actually looked like in 1945. The Bf-109, angular, propeller-driven, riveted aluminium panels, conventional tail. The P-51 Mustang, sleek but unmistakably an airplane in the way everyone on Earth understood the word. Even the Me-262 jets, revolutionary as they were, still had fuselages and tails and recognizable airplane anatomy. And then this thing rolls past. No propeller, no visible engine, no fuselage behind the cockpit, no tail. Just wing, stretching in both directions, a low whine building to a shriek as buried turbojets spooled up. Nothing in aviation, nothing in science fiction, nothing in the visual vocabulary of 1945 had prepared a single human being for this shape. The Ho 229 was ahead of its time in the most literal, non-metaphorical sense possible. But time ran out. Ziller was killed when an engine failed during a test flight, and the only flying example was wreckage in a Thuringian field. American troops found the unfinished V3 prototype at the Gotha factory, 70% complete, birch plywood and steel, the skeleton of something that had no business existing in 1945. It ended up at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia. Stabilized and preserved by conservation staff, but never fully restored, displayed in something approaching its as-captured condition. Never flown. Wood grain still visible where the skin remains intact. Warm, organic, unmistakably timber covering a form that reads as pure science fiction. It's still there today, still stopping people cold. After the war, Reimar emigrated to Argentina and kept building flying wings, including a sailplane called the Condor Andino in 1959. He couldn't stop. The shape wouldn't release him. It wouldn't release Jack Northrop either. Back in California, Northrop's engineers had solved the YB-35's gearbox nightmares the obvious way. Jet engines. No propellers, no drive shafts, no tortured mechanical linkages. They replaced the 4-piston engines with 4 Allison J35 turbojets, creating the YB-49. Same 172-foot wingspan, same pure flying wing. Cleaner, faster, the form pushed closer to its ideal than any aircraft in history. The YB-49 made its maiden flight on October 21, 1947, and the numbers were genuinely thrilling. Over 500 miles per hour at 40,000 feet. Strategic Air Command took notice. The press was fascinated, and parked on the tarmac next to a B-29 or B-36, the YB-49 didn't look like a bigger airplane. It looked like a different species, a vast, dark, swept shape with no fuselage, no tail, the crew entering through a belly hatch because there was no conventional door to walk through. It was beautiful, genuinely, achingly beautiful. Then came disaster. A YB-49 prototype broke apart during a test flight over the Mojave. The crew was killed. The desert floor was scattered with wreckage. No survivors. The crash was devastating, but it wasn't what killed the flying wing. Politics killed it. The Air Force pressured Northrop to merge his company. Northrop refused. There would be consequences. The YB-49 program was cancelled. And then came the part that crosses from politics into cruelty. The Air Force ordered every remaining flying wing airframe destroyed. Not mothballed, not stored at some desert boneyard for future evaluation. Destroyed. Workers cut the YB-35s and YB-49s into scrap aluminium. The most radical bomber concept in American aviation history. Reduced to junk metal by men following orders that originated, Northrop believed until his dying day, in political corruption rather than any failure of the aircraft. Imagine watching that. Imagine pouring years into proving a shape is right. Prototype after prototype, test flight after test flight, your company's money and your own reputation staked on a form you believe in with absolute certainty, and then watching men with torches dismember your life's work. Not because it failed. The flying wing flew. It flew fast and far and well. It was killed, Northrop was convinced, by political corruption, not by any failure of the aircraft itself. Jack Northrop resigned from his own company in 1952, 57 years old. He'd built something ahead of its time, and time had punished him for it. What followed was silence. 30 years of it. A series of debilitating strokes left him confined to a wheelchair, his speech severely impaired. He could scratch words on a notepad. That was about it. He spent 3 decades watching conventional aircraft fill the sky. The B-52 Stratofortress entering service in 1955 with its massive fuselage and 8 engines on pylons. The exact architectural philosophy he'd spent his career trying to render obsolete. Bombers with fuselages, fighters with tails. Every airplane in the world built on assumptions he knew were wrong. The math said so. The wind tunnels said so. His aircraft had proven it. But knowing you're right and watching the world ignore you are two entirely different forms of suffering. Jack Northrop endured both, in a wheelchair, in silence, for 30 years. Then, in April 1980, something happened. Engineers from the Northrop Corporation, the company that still bore his name though he'd left it nearly 3 decades prior, wheeled the 85-year-old Northrop into a secure briefing room. What they were about to show him was classified. It wouldn't become public for years, but they wanted him to see it first. They placed a drawing in front of him, a new strategic bomber, designed for the United States Air Force by a generation of Northrop engineers who had arrived, independently, through decades of advancing aerodynamic theory and computational fluid dynamics and radar cross-section analysis that didn't exist when Northrop was building the YB-49. At the exact same conclusion he'd reached 40 years earlier. The same conclusion Walter and Reimar Horten had reached in Bonn before they were old enough to drive. It was called the B-2 Spirit, and it was a flying wing. Pure wing. No fuselage, no tail. A broad, dark, swept shape with a 172-foot wingspan, the exact same dimension as the YB-35, as the YB-49. As though a new generation of engineers had reached back through half a century and grabbed the precise number Jack Northrop chose in the 1940s. Smooth, unbroken surfaces, engines buried within the wing, crew housed inside the wing itself. Standing alone on a runway, it didn't look like a descendant of the B-52. It looked like a direct, undeniable echo of the aircraft Jack Northrop had watched men cut apart with torches 31 years before. Same shape, same conviction. Vindicated by the most expensive, most advanced, most capable bomber in human history. Jack Northrop looked at the drawing, and he wept. He managed a single sentence on a notepad. His voice had failed him years ago. Now I know why God has kept me alive for 25 years. He died on February 18th, 1981, 10 months after seeing the drawing. He never saw the B-2 fly. Its first flight came on July 17th, 1989, 44 years after the Horten Ho 229 V2 made its last. 49 years after the N1M wobbled over a dry lakebed in the Mojave, and 6 decades after a self-taught engineer from California looked at a conventional airplane and decided that most of it was unnecessary. Here's what ahead of its time actually means, stripped of cliché. It doesn't mean clever. It doesn't mean forward-thinking. It means seeing the right answer clearly, decades before the world has the technology or the courage or the political will to agree with you. It means being punished for that clarity. And it means the truth doesn't care about your timeline. It arrives when it arrives. 2 brothers in Bonn carved it from birch plywood. A man in California built it from aluminum. The world took 50 years to catch up. And when it did, when the most advanced bomber ever constructed rolled out of a hangar in Palmdale, it wore the exact same form that Jack Northrop had seen in his mind before the Second World War started. Pure, swept, tailless, beautiful. The wing was always the right shape. They always knew. The world just needed half a century to agree. Subscribe for more stories like this one.